All right, everybody, welcome into KBO Chats Live. I'm Sam Pasco alongside Eric Halterman, and we are breaking down the best KBO picks for tonight's slate. Eric, KBO still going on. South Korean cases of COVID are on the decline. How you feeling?
Yeah, it's good. I'm hopeful that we'll get to watch a really exciting stretch run here. It's quite a good pennant race we've got. It looked like we may not have one for first few months of the season when the Dinos were pulling away from everything, but looks like we've got a real race. So it's been good. I had my first fantasy football draft the other day, which made me realize where it's like apparently fall or something. Apparently it's September. Um, was not aware of that. I'm not aware of anything in football these days with two baseball leagues to follow very closely, but I'm happy to keep it up and lose all of my fantasy football games for the first time in a long time. But it's a price worth paying, I think.
I know we're into September, and the Eagles they're losing time to make up ground for that fifth playoff spot. But all joking aside, Eagles not good. We are taking comments as well. Barry, welcome in. Great to see you again. Driving home, listening, staying safe. One thing I do got to mention, the KBO hashtag. I don't know if you noticed that on Twitter. Something up with that. It's not showing little emoji. I don't know if people are sleeping on the KBO, but I think there's some great baseball to be played.
I think they can still play baseball without a little picture by the hashtag, but I guess I wouldn't really know. I'm not your hashtag source here.
We'll see. We'll see. You're pretty tech savvy. We'll dive into it here. So, talking about some power rankings, a little out of date, but still some great information here. The top three teams, like you noted, only 2.5 games separating them. And the Dinos, they're still number one in terms of the standings, but yet you have the LG Twins, brand new number one team, atop the power rankings. What makes the Twins the best team?
Well, what made them the best team when I wrote this on Sunday evening was that they had been undefeated for 9 games in a row, while both the Dinos and Heroes were playing close to 500 ball over that similar stretch. Of course, the Twins have rewarded my faith by losing 2 in a row. I'm not sure that I would still put them top if I made these today, but it's been quite a run for them. I mean, even with a couple losses, it's an extended stretch. Um, they outscored their opponents 56-32 over that stretch. They beat some good teams too. There was a while where they just weren't beating good teams at all. They lost like every series against a playoff team for a couple months and straight early in the summer. But that problem seems to be fully gone now. It seems like they can beat anybody. Although, of course, as soon as I have faith in them, they fall off. So we'll see.
We'll see. Josh definitely surprised at that Twins in the number one spot, jumping up from number three last week. Moving down to the number two spot, the KT Wiz there. Another team doing the opposite of what you say. They lost last night. Got shut out by that Bears pitching staff. Rojas, though, at least back to the MVP caliber level. Are they another team that you're questioning that placement from Monday?
They do it to me again. I had them up at 2 a couple weeks ago. They rewarded me by going 2-4 against some not great competition, I think. Then they were good again, so I moved them right back up with the Heroes and Dinos looking mediocre. I still think they're just about as scary as any team in the league. That's why I have them right in the middle of that pack of what's the top three teams in the standings. For me, it's more or less a tier of 4. Though we'll talk about the Bears soon. They may be part of that tier of 4, making it a true tier of 5. But it's still over an extended period. The Wiz have been very, very good. They made up 8 games on the Dinos in their last, I think, 65 games, which is pretty long. But they were just bad pretty deep into the season. A month and a half, 2 months into the year, they were just nowhere close to the league leaders. And the fact that they're within striking distance, I doubt they're going to make up 5 games between now and the end of the season to claim the number one spot. But this is a franchise that has never made the playoffs at all in about a 6-7 year history, maybe 5, somewhere in there. They've never been close to this good. So it's already a historic season for them. The fact that they made up all this ground after really such a poor start with just awful pitching early on. like we talked about, if you're going to be a bad team, you'd rather be a one-dimensional team because you at least have half of the thing figured out, and that's what it came true with the Wiz. They had the hitting figured out from the start. Once the pitching started to come around, they looked like a legitimate threat.
Yeah, I remember times when ESPN was joking about how bad that bullpen was, just how many leads they blew after the 8th inning. It was not looking good. Then midseason looking maybe like a dark horse, and now serious contenders sitting at number 2 on the power rankings. Pretty impressive for this franchise, like you said, that hasn't been there. Moving down to number 3, the Kiwoom Heroes. They're kind of on a little slide, maybe, but they do have a series against the SK Wyverns. Already begun that yesterday, so maybe that's just what the doctor ordered to get them back on track.
Yeah, they've been somewhat mediocre after being hot for much of August. I believe even when they were hot, they still had somehow not been winning ever 3 games in a row. They just had this long stretch where it was 2 wins, 1 loss, 2 wins, 1 loss. But then, of course, they just strung together a 3-game losing streak to end last week. Losing to the Wiz is forgivable. Losing to the Eagles, not really. But it's a very tight pack. I think the top 4 could really go in any direction, and all it'll take is one hot week. A couple games against the Wyverns will help them there, but then they've got the Twins and Bears to close the week. So they are going to be tested. They're going to need to be better than they showed last week if they're to avoid falling more.
Yes, they do have the Eagles coming up in a little while, so hopefully we'll see how they bounce back if they do indeed lose to the Bears and Giants coming up, and Twins as well. One thing I do want to note is that, Ashton Russell was supposed to be a big energy guy for them, maybe settling down. They still rank 7th in batting average. Is that a little concerning? 5th in runs per game, but I don't know about that offense.
Yeah, Russell's been okay. I think he's hitting 290 something. He's just only has 1 homer. But they've got a deep stable of guys at the top half of the order. Jung-Hoo Lee he was second to Mel Rojas Jr. in OPS quite late into the year. Ha-Seong Kim's been incredibly hot. So they have enough talent there. I wouldn't be too worried. It's not necessarily the most elite lineup in the league, but it's a playoff caliber unit, I think.
All right, moving down. And speaking of playoff caliber, the NC Dinos, one of their lowest rankings we've ever seen on these power rankings. September has not been kind to them, 2-3-1. KBO does have ties in case you're just tuning in. Dinos, I want to say they're still legitimate contenders, but the way they've been playing, maybe for the past month and a half, I really don't know.
Yeah, it's been pretty mediocre. I think the stat I noted there, they have just 3 wins against playoff teams since the start of August. They're kind of doing what the Twins did over the summer, where they're, beating up the bad teams enough to stay in it. But that just an awful record against playoff teams certainly doesn't bode well when it comes to the playoffs, which I still fully expect them to make. They could still end up as the number 1 seed. They haven't lost that seed yet, but they're going to have to start beating good teams. I think Chang Mo Koo back would help, but he suffered a major setback, fractured his forearm a few days ago. I'm not sure exactly what his timeline is, but that certainly doesn't help. I bet if you looked at their records since he fell off, since he got injured at the end of July, they've definitely lost a few games in the standings since that point. So, again, a lot of their dominance early on was the fact that in Koo, Andrew Raczynski, and Mike Wright, they had 3 very reliable starters. Most KBO teams can get to 2 reliable starters. Usually both your foreign starters are reliable and decent shot. They have at least 1 local arm who's quite good. Some teams obviously don't get to that point. But 3 is a pretty high number. We talked about the Tigers being led by having up as many as 4 reliable guys at one time. The Twins are up there at some point. When the Dinos are back just down to 2, they look, a lot like the Bears did for a lot of the season when they just had Raul Alcantara and Chris Flexen and an offense, which, gets you to the playoffs. But they need to be competitive in games that aren't started by likes of Drew Raczynski or Mike Wright.
Yeah, definitely concerning. Maybe they peaked a little too early into the season. Now this is where it's going to be important for them to win come September. Now, Moving down, you mentioned about starting pitching. The Deuce and Bears, they need some starting pitching. And it looks like they're going to get that. Chris Flexen starting tonight. Is he just what they need to get back on track and be maybe a top 3 team?
Yeah, absolutely. They look quite good whenever Raul Alcantara or Chris Flexen was starting early in the year. They've now lost Flexen for almost 2 months, but he's coming back tonight. I'm sure we'll talk about that soon. And they also might be getting another good starter. I'm not sure if Duck Ju Ham, who I mentioned there, is going to stay in the rotation now that Flexen's back. But if he does, it's quite interesting. He hadn't started in a few years. He's been a closer and a pretty good one. Obviously, picking up a handful of saves per year for a team that's made 5 straight Korea series. You got to be pretty good. Starting his first time in 3 years, and he looks very good. It was just a single hit in 6 innings. It was against the Wyverns, but you can only beat who's in front of you, and that kind of dominance is definitely interesting. I believe he only threw like 61 pitches or something, 62 pitches, which means they probably did not expect to get 6 innings out of him. But if he gets built up to 100 pitches down the stretch here, and if he is close to as good as he was, I mean, he's got a 3.09 ERA on the year. You'd expect him to fall back a bit when he moves from the pen to the rotation. But even if that's like 3.5, 3.7 ERA, that would be very good, very reliable number 3 guy. So if that works out, they found Won Jun Choi a couple months ago as a decent back-end starter. They're finally finding maybe the pieces to fit behind Alcantara and Flexen. They could look a lot scarier down the stretch if that continues.
All right, we'll keep an eye on the Bears and that starting pitching staff. The Kia Tigers, they seem to kind of figure things out now. That pitching staff back on point, like you noted here. Are they now a serious contender for that number 5 spot in the playoffs?
Yeah, and I think they always have been. But again, they're a very one-dimensional team, very much about the pitching staff. Not the worst offense in the league, but pretty mediocre one. And when their pitchers were struggling, like Drew Gagnon and Aaron Brooks were, there's not a lot there. A bad offense combined with only one good starting pitcher is not a playoff team. But they've got at least 2 quite good ones. Brooks looked totally fine in his last start. Drew Gagnon, who we'll talk about soon, who's going tonight. Maybe not all the way back to his original form, but if he's close to it, and they've got Brooks and they've got Hyunjung Yang looking like an ace again. Not necessarily a true title contender, given that it's a very mediocre lineup compared to the top several teams. But it's definitely a wild card contender again.
All right, moving down. Lotte Giants looks like they're falling. Dan Straley, Dixon Machado, really not enough to propel this team. We saw them get hot a little while ago, but it doesn't look like they're actually serious contenders right now.
Yeah, how many games are they out now? About 4. That's 5 now after yesterday's games. Again, this is a team who finished last by a lot, like 10-ish games behind the Eagles last year. So it's tremendous progress for them to be where they are. Wouldn't expect them to close the gap. I was always surprised that they were as close as they were. I think it's more likely that they fade down the stretch than that they make a late charge. I don't see where that charge would be coming from. Adrian Sampson, as I noted, has been a bit better lately, but I think it's, even if he turns into an absolute ace, which I'd be very surprised about, I don't even know if that would be enough.
Would you say they're closer to SK at this point? Because there was a time where maybe they were looking a little closer to Kia. Are they officially now in that kind of bottom tier, Samsung, SK, Hanwha?
Maybe close to the Lions too, who are in between those. I could give it another week or so. I think they were respectable for long enough that I didn't strongly consider moving them down to 8th. But again, it was pretty poor run there. I guess they did rebound by beating the Twins since I posted this, but then they went and lost and got absolutely rocked by the Dinos last night by 12-run loss. So I think they're not a very legitimate contender, not technically out of it, but I think they're sort of in no man's land between the Tigers and the rest of the pool at this point.
That's fair, and especially when you look at that run differential sitting at 0. I didn't think we'd really kind of see that. Kind of funny how that worked out, but it's at 0. Basically 500 a tie every time, which is completely possible in the KBO. Finishing up now, we are running up on time. I don't know how much we want to talk about the Lions, Eagles, and Wyverns. You got the Wyverns down here, but like you said, you could pretty much mix these around. These are not good teams. What would you say is the need to know from this bunch?
I mean, the Wyverns have lost 10 in a row, so they're back down to 10. I'd move them back up to 9 since on the season as a whole, they've been a little bit better than the Eagles. Most of the year, the Wyverns have looked normal bad. There's always going to be a worse team in the league. The Eagles had a stretch where they looked incredibly bad, like historically bad, tying losing streak records bad. The Wyverns aren't there yet, but they have not looked very competitive lately. I guess they did lose by just one run last night, and they scored 15. But if you're managing to lose, even when you score 15, things aren't going well for you.
Yeah, definitely not a good situation with any of these teams at the bottom. So we'll move along and, of course, start with two of these teams in this bunch, the Eagles and Lions. Of course, we get a lot of action with these lower teams with the doubleheader tonight. So Minwoo Kim, facing off against David Buchanan. Buchanan looking pretty good since his first September start. 1 run, 7 innings, and 9 strikeouts against Dixon. And Minwoo Kim, pretty good in his last couple starts. I'm looking at an under here potentially.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing going against that would be that it is at the most hitter-friendly park in the league, Daegu Samsung Lions Park. And the other thing going against it is that this is a David Buchanan game, so you don't really know what's going to happen. I believe I picked him to lose last time because he was coming off 2 pretty mediocre outings, and he, again, had that awesome start, striking out 9, which is not something he generally does, against one of the best lineups in the league, too. He's faced this Eagles team twice. One of them, I believe, was one of his first blow-ups of the season. He gave up 8 against the Eagles once, which is hard to do. But then he faced him again in mid-August and gave up just 1 in 7 innings. Just a classic pair of David Buchanan outings there. On the whole, though, he's been solid. Doesn't strike out many guys, 15.2% strikeout rate. Those 9 strikeouts last time were his season high. Only the second time he's had even 8, which does cap his fantasy ceiling usually, although that won't matter tonight because neither game in this doubleheader is included in the DraftKings main slate. It's actually just a 4-game slate this time. Not entirely sure why they do that, but they do that sometimes. So no fantasy players to talk about in this one. I would definitely, like you said, not expect a ton of runs here. Both lineups are pretty weak. Buchanan is usually some total earned runs in his last 2 starts, and he's got 4 1-run starts in his last 6. So he's been pretty good. He's a high walk, high strikeout guy. The Eagles have a handful of those guys, which on the whole has more or less canceled out, and he's been close to a mid-rotation starter, which is pretty good for the Eagles. So it's 2 decent to maybe better than decent starters against 2 bad lineups in a hitter-friendly park. So I would expect not a ton of runs despite that park.
Yeah, Buchanan coming off 4 straight road games. That's probably more of a good thing since he is now coming back to a hitter-friendly park. So we'll see if that plays into it at all. But Kim definitely coming off 2 great starts against the real teams, the KBO Heroes and the LG Twins. And we can pretty much move on now because of the fantasy aspect. I was going to talk about Daniel Palka, first KBO home run. But overall, I don't see him as enough to really sway that under pick.
Yeah, I think we're going to need to see more games from him, but good to see that he's doing something. Overall, it's been actually kind of a Daniel Palka line. He's got 2 homers in 11 games, hitting just 225, but slugging 450, and he's on base 333. He walks and has power and misses the ball a lot, and it looks like he's still doing that in Korea. So it's a profile that should work. I think he should hit for enough homers to cancel out his strikeouts, but we'll have to see. Have to see him do it for more than just 2 weeks.
Yeah, a little bit more of a bigger sample size is needed for Palka. You talked about, not being a big factor in terms of fantasy. Any notes overall on game 2? Looks like the Eagles have a relief pitcher basically going for them tonight. And Taeyeon Wan, 7.32 ERA over his last 4. So that one is not looking like a good matchup like we see in game 1.
Yeah, we've got, like you said, Jinwook Kim has only made 2 starts this year. He's been mostly reliever. He hasn't been a good one. He barely played last year, too. Just 31.1 total career innings, an ERA over 5, a whip of 166. So looks like very much the kind of guy you'd expect to be thrown in the back half of a doubleheader. Taeyeon Wan, pretty mediocre for most of the season, pretty bad lately, as you said, 7.32 ERA. In his last 4 starts, 6 strikeouts against 9 walks in his last 4. So things definitely not going well for him overall. Low strikeout guy generally, giving up some homers. Pretty mediocre back end starter type. He is facing the Eagles, which should help him turn things around. But overall, I'd expect considerably more runs in this second game.
A little more offense in that game, too. So moving on, KT Wiz, do some Bears, a game that does
do
matter.
Want some picks for those two?
Did we want to do some picks? I mean, Eagles-Lions is never really a fun matchup, but under and over, you going to go with Lions on both of them?
Yeah, I'm going to go Lions on both. I mean, if I had to pick both as a set, I would assume that the Eagles are more likely to take one than lose both. But in both individual games, I would side Lions. I think they have the better starter and they have the better lineup. You need a reason to pick the Eagles, and there isn't really a particular reason in either one. So, yeah, under on the first, over on the second, and siding with the Lions on both.
That's a game 1 under and a game 2 over as well. Getting a little graphic here, as you can see. A little new thing we're trying out. So moving on, a game that does matter in terms of fantasy and picks overall. 2 pitchers going at it, Despaigne and Chris Flexen. I don't really know what to expect from your guy Flexen here. He tossed, 7 innings of 1-run ball, his last real start before he was out forever. Now he's back facing a powerful Wiz offense that was actually held scoreless yesterday. So I don't really know where to go here.
Yeah, the big question for me is Flexen's innings. He hasn't started a game in almost 2 months, and there was no reports on him having any sort of rehab start. So it seems like this is him building back up into shape. We don't have the same level of info we get about MLB regarding, this guy threw exactly 21 pitches in a bullpen session and threw 15 fastballs, 3 curveballs, and 3 changeups or whatever. We don't have that level of detail. So it's hard to predict exactly how long he's going to go, but it would be a surprise if he went more than 5 innings, I would think. Somewhat in the dark here, which does definitely hurt the Bears, especially with them moving Duck Juham into the rotation, taking away one of their better relievers. But I would expect Flexen to throw good innings when he's in there. He's been pretty good throughout the year, striking out almost 22% of batters. That's about almost 4 ticks above league average, and he's got a below average walk rate by a hair. So he's very much what you'd expect out of one of your 2 foreign starters. He's not necessarily one of the best ones in the league, but completely adequate for the job. And that more or less describes Odeshammer Despaigne on the opposite side. His ERA is just over 4. Basically league average strikeout rate for him and a slightly better than average walk rate. But he's got some unreliability to him. He's got a 10 earned run on his resume, and he's got an 8 in there too. That 10 was against the Bears back at the start of June. Although lately it's been, well, not necessarily lately. In his last start, he went 8 against the Wyverns. I don't know how much we count that for, but he went 8 in his last start and only gave up 1 run. That followed a pretty mediocre 3-game stretch in which he had an ERA of 5.60 and a whip of 192. So if he hadn't just been coming off of that quite good start against the Wyverns, I'd be pretty worried about him here, especially against a team as good as the Bears. But given that he looked considerably better there, I think it's it's a very tight one here.
Yeah, Lightning pick saying Despaigne looks a little tired. And I was going to compare Despaigne to David Buchanan, a guy that's had rough couple 4 starts and then a really good one his last time out. So we'll see if Despaigne can keep that up. The Bears offense, 8 runs last night was impressive. And their leadoff guy, Kunwoo Park, 4 hits in his last 2 games. You've talked about the Bears, having one of the deepest lineups in the game. Do you look at them, that being the edge with 2 comparable starters?
They both got quite good lineups too. Maybe the Wiz aren't necessarily as much about the depth, but they've got the heights that no other team can reach. Mel Rojas Jr., after 2 or 3 pretty bad weeks, he's got an OPS of 1563 in his last 7 games. Becco Gong, in his last, we'll go back 12 games, has an OPS of 1245. So those 2 are incredibly hot right now. Should definitely give Flexen some problems. Rojas being a switch hitter, Gong being a lefty means they'll both get the platoon advantage. I think they're both playable from fantasy side here. I recommended Rojas in the cheat sheet just because he's been ridiculously hot yet again. I do think they may have a couple tough at-bats early during Flexen's innings, but I'm not sure Flexen will throw enough innings that we should be too scared of the Wiz hitters here. So I think tons of firepower on both sides, 2 good pitchers with some questions. It's a very even, very, very good game here.
Yeah, and just talking about Mel Rojas Jr., when you look at his stats here on rotowire.com, 350. I mean, that's something where you think, okay, maybe he's played like 12 games or something. No, this guy's been doing this the entire year. And Chris Flexen going to have a rough time coming in to that his first time around. But we'll see how that turns out. Josh noting this is a potential playoff matchup. So get a little preview here before we dive into the very interesting KBO playoff structure. Another potential playoff matchup we have is coming over to the LG Twins and the Kia Tigers matchup. Before we do that, I almost forgot. But who are you going to take on that Bears? I'm just excited with all these pitching matchups. I want to get to all these guys. Who are you on, Flexen or Spanier?
Yeah, like I said, it's just 2 quite even pitchers, 2 quite even lineups. To me, it comes down to which risk are you more willing to take? Are you more willing to take the risk of Flexen, who hasn't pitched in nearly 2 months, or Despaigne, who was pretty bad until his last start? I'm going to side with Despaigne here, but not all that confidently. I'd rather have a guy who has at least been pitching recently, even if it's been a little bit sketchier for some of that. I think if we'd seen, even 4 decent innings from Flexen last week, and this was a second start back, I think I may have sided with him. And I wouldn't argue too hard against anybody who does, but I think the first start back is just too many questions for me. Granted, it is just a foot. The worries would be higher if he was coming off an elbow thing or a shoulder thing, which, again, if somebody uses that to justify Bears pick, it's fine by me. But just a little bit too much risk for me, so I'll side with the Wiz.
I like that they're Flexing. I just don't know what to expect. You're looking at maybe he goes 8 innings, maybe he goes 3, but we don't know what their plans are for him. Now officially moving on over to the LG Twins and the Kia Tigers, that playoff matchup. Getting ahead of myself there because we have some great matchups, some great pitching matchups too. Tyler Wilson, Drew Gagnon going at it here. Gagnon has been the tale of 2 starters over his last 4. Third and fourth start, ERA of 12. Last 2 starts, ERA of 2.7. Which Drew are we going to see tonight against the LG Twins?
Yeah, we're just full of foreign pitchers who are good, but have some question marks today. It was really interesting making today's cheat sheet in that all these guys are like, I usually recommend this guy. I usually recommend this guy. But taking in a bit more, there's reasons why not to pick just about any of these guys. Gagnon in his first 4 starts of August had an ERA of 9 and a WHIP of 2.58. Just 1 more strikeout than walk in those first 4 starts. But then, like you said, over his last 2, quite good. 4 runs on 8 hits over 13 innings in his last 2. If you just looked at that, he looks like he's totally fixed. If you look on over to the strikeouts and walks, maybe a little bit more questionable, just 8 strikeouts against 6 walks. When he was really good early, it was just some elite strikeout to walk ratios. His ERA, I don't think was ever quite elite, but I was a big fan because those numbers usually suggest that your ERA is going to come down. But what ended up happening was his ERA didn't come down and his strikeout and walk ratio got worse, which isn't usually how it goes at all. Usually your ERA doesn't predict your strikeout to walk ratio. It usually goes in the other direction. I would have liked to see more convincing numbers in those 2 columns if I was to be fully behind him. I did have him as my 3rd recommendation on today's cheat sheet, just because there's kind of questions about everybody, and he has the talent and the upside. He's still a good strikeout pitcher overall, even if he's fallen off a bit lately. It's a strikeout rate of 20.6%, is about 3 ticks above league average. That's good. He's walked about 1 tick more than league average, 9.6%. On the whole, that adds up to somebody who should be a solid, maybe number 2, number 3, maybe more number 3 with a high walk rate. But yeah, it's been shaky lately. I wouldn't have a ton of confidence in him, especially against a hot Twins team. But he's at least not in the depths of that slump.
And then looking over to the LG Twins and Tyler Wilson, I wish I could say the same in terms of optimism with the starting pitcher. Tyler Wilson has been roughed up his last 4, and it's not looking good. When you look at that 5.1 ERA in his last 4. And, you'd say, okay, maybe he got a little unlucky. He did. He faced the Dinos twice, but he's facing a Kia Tigers team tonight that's averaging almost 6 runs a game in their last 5. So I don't know if it's going to get any better for Wilson against the Tigers and Preston Tucker.
Well, it's another interesting one here because, like you said, he's given up a lot of runs lately. It's 5.11 ERA over his last 4. It's not terrible, but not at all what you want from one of your 2 foreign starters. But then if you look at the strikeout and walks lately, it's 22 strikeouts against just 4 walks, which is a lot better than what he was doing over his previous several starts. He had 7 before that 4-game stretch that we're talking about now. He had 7 straight in which he allowed no more than 3 earned runs in a start and had a 3.07 ERA. But his underlying numbers there were considerably worse. In that good stretch, he had a 149 whip, and in this supposedly bad stretch, it's a whip of 122. So a bit of a confusing line from him. I don't think there's any reason to believe he's a better pitcher when he's striking out fewer guys and walking more. That would fly in the face of most things we know about baseball. So on the whole, maybe wouldn't react too much to either stretch and look at his season-long numbers where he's been, a pretty good starter. ERA is over 4, and judging by his league average strikeout rate and only slightly better than average walk rate, it doesn't seem like he deserves an ERA a whole lot better. But it's a pitcher who should be good enough to shut down who the Tigers are normally. Like you said, the Tigers have been a bit hotter lately, so maybe it's a tougher start than normal. But on the whole, he's maybe been a bit more reliable than Gagnon, although not necessarily a whole lot better.
Yeah, we'll have to see some very unusual pitching tonight. That's why I'm just trying to get to them all. Wilson, Drew Gagnon, crazy stuff offensively in this game. Roberto Ramos, he seems to be pretty good. Preston Tucker, he's hot. And Hyun-Soo Kim, he was in the power rankings, excuse me. Offensively, we're looking at an over here.
It's an interesting one because you'd really only need one of the 2 pitchers to go bad. I would expect on a given night them both to be something close to 6 innings, 3 runs, which would lean under. But like you said, only one of them needs to be off. And given that they've both been unreliable lately, I think I'd be fine with the over. I think I'll side with the Twins. I think Gagnon's been a little bit more unreliable, but it's a pretty close one, and I don't hate that pick for the Tigers there either. It's 2 very close teams. The Twins have a better lineup on the whole, which is why I'm going to side with them. But both starters seem like they have a bad start in them. So it's definitely some arguments for the Tigers there.
Lightning Picks noted the Twins bullpen was roughed up too. Does that factor into your pick at all? Are you worried about that or no?
That's true. It's a good point. I mean, they had to play Monday due to a rain out game, a makeup game, which teams rarely ever have to do in Korea. They almost always get every single Monday off. So that's definitely something, although Tyler Wilson can usually go deep-ish into the game. It might be one of those things where they push him into the seventh, kind of even if he's given up 4 or 5. But I think he's capable of doing it. I mean, he goes deep-ish most of the time. He's got a couple 5s recently, but very, very frequently he goes, I guess, exactly 6. Seems to do that quite often. So it's definitely, that's a small point against the Twins, and if that pushes you to the Tigers, like I said, most of the things about both teams profile pretty similarly effective but shaky pitchers. For me, again, it's the Twins' overall strength in the lineup is going to be the decider. But
all right, so we'll look at the Twins and the over in this one. Moving on, we got the Dinos in what should be another easy matchup against the Lotte Giants. Mike Wright, he's coming off a great start against the Kiwoom Heroes. I'm thinking all Dinos here and pretty easily.
Yeah, if this were a few weeks ago when the Dinos were struggling more and the Giants were hot, it might be closer. Mike Wright, I have not been super in on all year, but that doesn't mean he's bad. I think he was frequently overpriced on DraftKings because his ERA was low early, but his high walk rate in particular suggested that it was going to rise, and it has risen. In the low 4s, though, is still perfectly fine. And his price has gone down. I think he's the cheapest of the 5 foreign starters on this slate for DraftKings, and I think maybe the most reliable. He's also had some mediocre-ish starts lately. I think he's got a bunch of where he's allowed 4 earned runs in the last few, but he hasn't been destroyed in quite some time. His last 6 starts, 4.11 ERA, 1.26 WHIP, fine, nothing too special. He strikes out, again, about a tick better than league average, 19.5%, 9.6% walk rate. Both of those are very close to Drew Gagnon numbers, actually. So it's a Drew Gagnon-esque pitcher who hasn't had the same recent struggles. I think that's going to be plenty good against a pretty mediocre Giants lineup, especially a heavily right-handed lineup that Mike Wright should get the platoon advantage against pretty much all of their top hitters.
One interesting thing I want to bring up in this game in terms of like a prop bet, the Dinos, they scored 14 runs yesterday, but 10 of them came in the first inning. This Dinos lineup is probably the best when it's fully healthy and it's going, probably better than the Bears, if I can say that. Do we see that again tonight? What's the matchup looking like for that Dinos offense?
Yeah, Kyunghyun No is definitely nothing special. Dinos were not one of my recommended stacks, although they were probably quite close to it. No's coming off a pair of pretty bad starts too. He's allowed 10 earned runs in 10 innings over his last 2. Has not really been good at any point. He was the guy, I think we talked about him several weeks back. He was out of KBO entirely and pitching in Australia last year. And he's come back, and he's been better than you would have guessed for a guy who pitched in Australia last year. 36-year-old. He did actually have a 4.08 ERA in 2018 before heading to Australia, but he's pretty much a mediocre back end starter. Nothing too special. Doesn't necessarily walk a ton of guys, but shouldn't scare the Dinos at all. He strikes out just 12.9%. That's well below league average by more than 5 percentage points. This is going to allow a lot of contact, not necessarily a lot of walks, but when you allow a lot of contact to hitters that are as good as the Dinos, it's going to be trouble for you.
Yeah, well, when you look at his 2020 projections, he definitely blew the strikeout numbers way out of there, projected 0. But one thing I bring up the projections is because in this Giants lineup, we have Dixon Machado, who was an all-star despite there not being an actual all-star game. And he's hitting 297. He was projected just 259. Is he someone that we should be looking out for more and take seriously as being maybe the key contributor to a Giants team that's maybe fallen out of the playoff race?
He's definitely a useful player. I mean, it's OPS of 821 or 820. Looks like that's a rounding thing. And with his level of defense, being able to be an above-average hitter at shortstop, I think that's a very useful piece. We've talked about how the Giants kind of went a different route with their lone foreign hitter. The vast majority of foreign hitters in the KBO are sluggers, the Roberto Ramos type, the Jamie Romack type. There's not very many even well-rounded players. It's almost exclusively the big bats. Obviously, there are a few. But a defense-first player like Machado is definitely a different look, and it seems like it's not a bad idea given that he's an above-average hitter. There was a while where it looked like he was going to be a below-average hitter also in Korea. His OPS was below 700 as late as the middle of June, which is just not what you want. I mean, even if you play good defense, you can get more than a 680 OPS guy with good defense from your lone foreign hitter spot. But given that he's really picked things up since then, over his last 62 games, it's an OPS over 900. Not somebody who scares opposing pitchers. 10 homers on the season is probably more than we would have guessed, but not intimidating. But from an overall value perspective, I think it's an interesting way the Giants are going, and not necessarily a bad idea either.
Interesting, Machado. Maybe turning things on here. Lightning picks noting about getting lit up last time. Going to go Dinos here and the over because of that deep Dinos lineup.
Yeah, I think the Dinos should be able to do enough here to do most of the work on that over themselves. And Mike Wright is not necessarily a shutdown guy, even if he's one of the better, more reliable arms on the slate. So I think it's pretty comfortable over.
All right, moving on to the last game of the 6-game one doubleheader. We have the Heroes and Wyverns, which doesn't look like it'd be a great matchup, but it's kind of been weird when we look at what happened yesterday. With 31 runs scored, Romack had 4 hits, Russell went 2 for 4, Ha-Seong Kim had another great game. But yet the Wyverns still on a 10-game losing streak. Maybe no Jong Choi tonight? What are we looking at with this SK Kiwoom game?
Yeah, probably no Choi. I think he's missed the last 2. Was it a back? Some nagging minor thing. Sore back. But actually, these 2 teams, both of them were my 2 recommended stacks. And that's not just because they were really good yesterday, although it definitely helps when you combine for 31 runs. It's easier to pick your hitters the next day, easier to feel confident about guys. The 3 different guys had multi-homer games in that game yesterday, in that 16-15 win for the Heroes. Ha-Seong Kim and Woon Bing Kim for the Heroes, and Jamie Romack for the Wyverns. And I would expect a lot more runs in this one because it's probably the 2 worst pitchers, at least on the DraftKings slate. Possibly the guy who's going in the second game for the Eagles, Jin-Wook Kim, might give them run for their money as the worst pitcher on the slate, but he's again, neither game from that doubleheader is on the DraftKings main slate tonight. So I would think a lot of runs here. I'd be pretty happy with most hitters up and down the lineup. We've just got 2 very unreliable pitchers. Young Gun Joe for the Heroes, who's got to be the best name in the league, I think, has not necessarily been that fireballing maverick of a player you might expect given the name. He is coming off a good start, but that's a pretty big surprise given what he's done throughout the year. He's been a starter in 7 of his 14 appearances, although he's never gone more than 5 innings, and he's only gone more than 4 innings twice. So you'd think this might be close to a bullpen game for the Heroes, but I don't think they can afford for it to be one, given that their bullpen threw, I think it was 6 1/3 innings yesterday. So that's real good for Wyverns hitters. I mean, when Joe's in there, he's very unintimidating, and if they can get him out early, they're going to get a tired bullpen in as early as, the 3rd inning or 4th inning in a normal Joe start. He's striking out just 10.3% of opposing batters this season, which is barely more than half of the league average rate, and he's walking 12.4%. You never want a strikeout to walk ratio that's less than 1, and his is less than 1 pretty comfortably. I guess it's only by 3 total walks on the season because he hasn't thrown that many innings, but there's a reason he hasn't thrown that many innings, because he's done just about nothing with them. He was better in relief lately. He's only given up 2 runs in his last 12 total innings, but if you look at what he's been throughout the year, he's been, it doesn't seem like he has much business pitching at this level. And I don't think a few good relief appearances and 1 good start is enough for me to have all that much faith in him.
So we're going to like the over. You stack in the lineups here. I think you'd have to just take the heroes, even though young gun has not been a young gun recently.
Yeah, I think Sun Gun Beck might be even worse on the other side, or close to it. I recommended stacking the heroes as well. I think what's the over under here? 11.5 seems several runs too low. Sun Gun Beck has not shown anything either. ERA of in the mid 7s, a whip over 2. His strikeout to walk ratio is actually not less than 1. He has 27 strikeouts against 24 walks. It's slightly better than league average strikeout rate, but a 17.3% walk rate is just terrible. He's walking 1 out of every 6 batters, to put it another way. So I think he's going to have base runners on all day. He's very hittable too, 2.3 homers per 9 innings. Normally it's 1 homer per 9 is the league average. He's well more than double that. So a lot of base runners, a lot of meatballs. Would expect a ton of runs from the Heroes side as well.
A lot of offense in this game as expected. What's your top pick, Eric, as that's the entire slate just about our show as we're running up on time?
I think the top pick would be Dinos over Giants. I mean, you got the top team in the league versus one of the worst teams, and you've got one of the better starters for the Giants against one of the mediocre to bad starters for the Giants. Sorry, yeah, strong starter for the Dinos, weak starter for the Giants. Strong lineup for the Dinos, weak lineup for the Giants. Pretty straightforward there. That would be number 1. If we're doing a top 3, the Heroes Wyverns over would be number 2. Just no pitching there at all. And number 3, I'm going to go with the David Buchanan Lions game. But it's David Buchanan, and you never know what you're going to get. And he is facing a pretty decent pitcher for the Eagles. But they're still the Eagles. I think even a team like the Lions should be comfortably favored over the Eagles. And when they've got one of their better starters in Buchanan, I think that's good enough for number 3 for me.
I like it. I'd probably pick about the same. Maybe you look at that Flex and Despaigne game, but it just seems too even. You'd have to know a little bit more about what Flexen's going to give you tonight to really pick that one. Like the top 3, the Dinos over in the Heroes Wyverns, and the Lions over the Eagles in game 1. Hopefully we should see that one. Only 16% chance of rain in that game 1. 2 a.m. Eastern start time. And that's all we got here. Sam Pasco alongside Eric Halterman for KBO Chats Live. Check us out on Twitter at RotoWireKBO. Check out rotowire.com for all your KBO needs. Thanks for tuning in, guys.
Yeah, thanks for coming, everybody.